Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what should we do with Hawaii's drug offenders? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff of Hawaii News Now. In Hawaii and across the nation, policymakers are considering diverting more low-level drug offenders from prison to alleviate overcrowding and save taxpayer money. While advocates say that could get more drug abusers into treatment programs, others believe that the possibility of jail time with or without treatment is necessary to deter drug offenders from relapsing and ending up right back in the criminal justice system. Tonight on Insights, what should we do with Hawaii's drug offenders? We want to hear from you during tonight's show. Call 973-1000 if you live on Oahu or 800-238-4847 if you're calling from a neighbor island. You can also watch Insights streamed live at pbshawaii.org. Just click on the title of tonight's show or find us on Twitter at PBS Hawaii. Now to our panel. Jake Delaplane is a Honolulu deputy prosecuting attorney assigned to the Career Criminal Division. He feels incarceration may be the best option for repeat offenders who continue to violate probation or parole. Dr. Kathleen Kozak has worked at Straub Clinic and Hospital as an internist since 1999. Dr. Kozak advocates for a medical approach to fighting addiction and believes many addicts would benefit from mandatory rehabilitation facilities, detoxification, I'm getting all tangled up, regimens instead of incarceration. Judge Stephen Ahm presides over the First Circuit Court's Adult Drug Court Program. In 2004, Judge Ahm created the Hawaii's Opportunity Probation with Enforcement Program, better known as HOPE. The HOPE program imposes immediate jail time as a sanction for positive drug tests or other violations and has been touted as effective for felony drug offenders at high risk of recidivism. And Dennis Tamura struggled with drug addiction most of his adult life. Mr. Tamura served more than 5 years in jail for drug-related offenses, spent time in and out of rehab, and participated in the HOPE program before finding sobriety in 2012. And let's start off, Jake Delaplane. How prevalent are drug offenders in the prison system? I mean, is it true that someone could go to prison right away for just possessing drugs?
You know, I think in the state of Hawaii, the way our system is set up, there are many, many chances along the way for someone who's caught up in drug offenses and drug crime to get out of that cycle of addiction and change their life and go on the right path. You know, my boss, Keith Kaneshiro, he brought the drug court program to the state of Hawaii back in 1994. And that's one of the diversion programs that are sort of integral to our system in the state that give people a really, really good set of chances to turn their life around and turn away from drugs. When you talk about drug offenses, and especially first-time drug offenders that have possession amount of drugs, so drugs not that they're intending to sell, not in any large amounts, but just enough to use, there's almost no chance that they're going to be serving jail time as a sentence for that particular crime. If they have no priors, they have no violent history, if they don't have a violent offense that's paired with that crime, then there's virtually no chance that they will be going to prison the first time out of the gate.
Dr. Kozak, has that been your impression in looking at some of this research that really, and is it that good if people who have possession crimes aren't being punished by the criminal justice system?
Well, I think we really have to look at the use of illegal drugs and addiction as a medical problem. And so when you think about people who have chronic medical illnesses, whether it be diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, when you consider treating those people, you certainly don't think about treating them and then stopping the medication, because obviously the condition would come back. One of the big issues with people who do have drug offenses is that if they become addicted to that particular drug, whether it be OxyContin or heroin, whatever the case may be, there are medical changes that occur in their body. And if we don't find a mechanism to start to address those medical changes, and we look at it as more a behavioral issue or a criminal issue, that we're really not getting them into the right location. And there are a lot of folks for whom it is not addressed in a medical perspective. And although they may have 1 or 2 offenses with possession, they're not put into the right rehabilitation situation. And that isn't supported either financially or personally from their family. So I don't see that they're getting an adequate opportunity to get off of drugs. I don't think it's as simple as it might seem from what people might look at with statistics from those incarcerated. There's a lot of other folks out there, and I think we're not reaching them correctly.
Judge Alm, your program, your HOPE program in particular, has put you in contact with a lot of drug offenders. Do we have misconceptions in the community about how the criminal justice system treats drug offenders?
I think so, and I think, and I was the toughest sentencer in the building. You know, more consecutive sentences, because they're really violent and dangerous. The ones who won't stop stealing should be sent to prison at sentencing. But at the same time, I also believe that we should be sending to prison people we're afraid of, not that we're mad at. So Mr. Delaplane's totally correct. You know, the first time you come up, you're going to get put on probation. The problem is probation itself doesn't work very well. Probation is the alternative to prison at sentencing. And since if people violate the conditions of probation, the only thing the PO's probation officers could do if they kept violating, they try to work with them, talk to them, encourage them, try to refer them to treatment. But when they didn't do that, then they'd come back to court and ask me to send them to prison for 5 or 10 years. So that's how HOPE started. I was just discouraged at the existing probation system and thought, we got to figure out a way to do that better.
Okay, we'll talk more about HOPE and drug court later on when we talk about diversion programs. But I wanted to get a little bit of Dennis Tamura's story. You spent how much time have you spent, or had you spent in prison or jail before you got?
I think it's over 10 years total, but the spans of 3.5 years, 2 years, year and a half, and jail time.
And what kind of things did you do to get you there?
I got caught for drugs, and because I was addicted to drugs, I had to keep up with my habits. I went out and stole, went shoplifting, and eventually selling drugs on the side to keep up with my habit. So
when you first went to prison, what was it for?
It actually was for possession and of drugs, third-degree promotion, and theft. I had numerous second-degree theft charges that they finally put together.
Oh, okay. So you actually did get several chances, and you just
got
kept
many chances, yeah.
And was that appropriate, do you think? Do you wish they could have dropped the hammer on you earlier?
Oh, no. But I needed that. I needed to get out of that cycle.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And we'll talk some more about your story. Jake Delaplane from the prosecutor's office. So how does the criminal justice system evaluate whether someone should be in prison or not?
You know, I think from a prosecutor's perspective, you know, it's our duty to go out there, assess the case, make sure there's probable cause for the case, charge the case, and usher it through the system. Basically, charge it, go to trial if we need to, enter into plea negotiations if the situation warrants it. From our perspective, you know, if this is truly an offense that's based on an addiction, if it's coming from a place where the addiction is causing the other crimes, it's like Dennis said, if it's something that's driving the other crimes, the addiction, you know, is leading someone to go out and steal, leading someone to go out and sell drugs to support their habit. If they're not doing that on a large scale, they're not doing something violent to really hurt the community, then from a prosecutor's perspective, we absolutely want to give that kind of person a chance to change their ways and get on the right path. You know, when it crosses that line and they become a danger to the community, when it crosses that line and they become a major seller, so a major source of this poison out into the community, then that's when I think that the state should step in, hold people accountable, remove them from society, so that danger to society is sort of alleviated.
Let me ask though, what fact or threshold in your perception or your decision moves someone from being an addict to a dangerous criminal?
So again, aside from the obvious, they go out and commit murder or some sort of assault or robbery. I'll just give an example. I had a case recently, and it went all the way through trial, and the individual was convicted. But this was a drug dealer out of Ala Park, and he wasn't homeless himself. He was going out to Ala Park every day, sitting on the rock wall at Ala Park, and essentially preying on the drug addicts that live in Ala Park. When he was finally caught by the police after months and months of investigation and operations, he had about 87 bags of crystal methamphetamine and crack cocaine on his person. All of this was caught on camera by the cameras in Chinatown. There were some undercover buys that went on as well. We went to trial with that case. I tried the case. It was a meth trafficking one because he had a whole lot of drugs.
What's the mandatory sentence for that if convicted?
So it's a 20-year open term, and because he had prior convictions for doing the same thing, not to that level, but certainly selling drugs, then he was looking at a significant mandatory minimum term of imprisonment on that open 20-year term.
Let me ask this. Let me ask Dr. Kozak. So here we've got a case that he described, which is basically a drug user becoming a very active drug seller and facing 20 years in prison. Do you think that that's appropriate?
Well, you have to look at the situation and say, okay, presumably this man is addicted to the drug that he's selling. And if that is definitely the case, has he been given the opportunity to go to rehab, and or is the reason he's selling because he's trying to fuel his habit because he's become so addicted to it? And so one of the things that I think would be helpful to know is someone like that been to rehab? Have they tried it? Have they failed it several times? Because if you look at someone who is a drug offender and you look at the drugs that they're addicted to, by putting them in prison and not necessarily having the rehabilitation component, what we're essentially doing is taking someone who has presumably damaged their brain with their drug use, and without addressing that mental health issue, we are creating a bigger mental health issue for the person, and in addition, we're not solving the drug problem. And so, yes, they might go through horrible withdrawal, and they might wind up not using drugs while incarcerated because they can't get them. But those changes that occur in their brain haven't been addressed, and unless we take a look at it from a medical perspective, even incarceration may not be successful for this individual. They may wind up, either if they don't get a full 20 years, if they wind up being in jail less than that, they might wind up going right back to the habit, or God forbid, getting drugs while in jail through some means unknown to me.
Okay, that brings up a good question from our one of our viewers, Sarah and Mike Kelly, and I'll try this with you, Judge Alm. How do we know who will benefit from jail time and who won't?
Well, for people with drug possession, which is the large number, that's the overwhelming majority, they're not going to go to jail the first time. They may get some jail as a short term, as a condition of probation, but they're typically going to be placed on probation for 4 years. So we should do a more effective job of supervising it, and that's where Hope probation came in. So most people in Hope are going to do better. They're going to get a swift, certain, proportionate, consistent jail sanction that's as short as possible to tie together the bad behavior with a consequence and learn from it. Most people are going to do well. If they don't, some of them are going to fail. That's the problem. Most people get put on probation at first, but under the regular probation system, many fail and end up going to prison. That costs taxpayers $46,000 a year. And I think the public has an idea. If people go to prison, problem solved. The average person is going to do 2 or 3 years in prison. They're going to sit around with their buddies and talk about getting high and breaking into houses and other kinds of things. And, you know, we've got an expert here.
I was going to say, Dennis, tell me about that. Was prison a place where people were actually getting rid of their criminal minds, or was it increasing their criminal minds?
Both. It depends what kind of frame of mind you enter prison with. In the beginning, yeah, I learned how to be a better criminal. I asked questions for people that did bigger crimes, and how did you get away? What was the mistake? But after a while, you know, it's all on me. So it's, what am I going to do with this time? I'm going to try to learn as much as possible and start moving another direction, or I'm just going to sit here and chew the fat and just let the time go. And then I'll be released and free again to do whatever I choose to do. So
What threw the switch? I mean, or was it more of a gradual change in that frame of mind?
hope probation is what helped me. In the beginning, I was resistant. I thought I could pull all my tricks and still know I wouldn't go to prison. And after a while, it didn't make any sense anymore. It was very humiliating to be processed in the system, going to a CCC. It broke me. It's like, I don't have to put myself through this, you know, because even as a person I was, I had pride, and they'll break it down really fast. And I get tired of it. And I finally caught on that it's up to me. The first thing I had to remember was that I had to put hope probation as my priority in life over everything. But I didn't have that kind of thinking, and therefore I failed. But once I said, okay, I'm going to do everything that I'm supposed to do, I have a better chance of making it.
But we're convinced hope works because now the system is, I think, treating people like adults, laying out what likely consequences are, telling people we care about them, we want them to succeed. But they're adults, they're going to make the choices. And if they make good choices, they get good outcomes. If they make bad choices, they get bad outcomes. But if the people in hope, I supervised 2,000 probationers, a quarter of the probationers on the island. If they didn't think they were being treated fairly, they wouldn't buy into the system, because now they know they're on felony probation, they know there ought to be rules. So now the rules are enforced, but in a consistent and proportionate way. And we're convinced that folks think they're being treated fairly, they're going to make better choices, and that's better for all of us.
Let me ask Jake Delaplane, since we're on the subject of hope probation, and the judge has brought, he's got pretty convincing statistics about its success. But I know that your office, your boss, Keith Kadashiro, has been quite critical of the hope program. Where do you see hope falling short?
I think that I'd just like to start out by saying, I think obviously we have to have a probation system. It's an integral part of our criminal justice system. It helps people get on the right track. And as part of probation, people should be very closely supervised and held accountable when they deviate from what the rules are. Hope probation does a great job of that. There's a lot of supervision, it's very close. I think from our perspective, there are just far too many people that are being sentenced to probation, even hope probation, that have no business whatsoever being on probation. And that's more of an issue with the judges at the trial level. I didn't mention this before, but that individual that I talked about before, that trial, where he had the 87 bags at Ala Park, that case was reduced by the judge at trial because he said that the state didn't prove that he had over 1 avoirdupois ounce. Now, I don't know if anybody at the table knows what an avoirdupois ounce is.
I'm going to say no.
Maybe the doctor does. But so an avoirdupois ounce is just a regular ounce. You go to the store, you buy a steak, that's an avoirdupois ounce. That it's in the statutory definition, it's not an element of the offense. But the judge decided, well, since nobody said the word avoirdupois ounce, I'm going to reduce the charge down to a Class C felony. And so he was then only facing a 5-year term with a very small, 1-year mandatory minimum. This was not an individual that was addicted to drugs, feeding his addiction. He was the predator down in the park, selling to everyone else. So that individual, he did get sent to prison because he had his priors and there was a mandatory minimum in place. But people like that, people who are preying on the addiction of others, people who are dangerous, they have no place whatsoever on probation, out in society. Those people should be locked away. I mean, that's what our prison system is for. We should lock up people that scare us, that can harm us, not people that just annoy us or maybe have addiction problems themselves.
But let me understand what you're saying. Sure. So what you're saying is the problem is not with the hope probation program so much as the people that are selected to go in there, that some of them probably aren't going to, too many of them won't succeed.
Right. It's people that should be sent to prison that are in hope probation. They're not out committing new offenses because they're a hope probationer. They're out committing new offenses because, well, they have some issue, whether it's a mental health issue or they're just a criminal and they need to turn away from that path. Those people should go to prison. They should be removed from society. Society should be kept safe. And the people that could turn it around, people that are stealing, people that are doing drugs, things like that, those are the types of people that should go through a closely monitored probation process, not violent offenders.
And reasonable people can disagree. You know, as the judge, if they violate the conditions of probation, the question is, how many chances am I going to give them? And, you know, I think Mr. Kaneshiro, if he were a judge, might not give him as many chances. And, you know, I was a prosecutor for 16 years. I was a career prosecutor before becoming a judge. I was actually the first career prosecutor to be appointed to circuit court in Honolulu ever. If people aren't committing new crimes and they're not running away too often, I give them multiple chances, because we're trying to change people's thinking to change their behavior. And some of the time you have to wear them down. You know, they're going to go to jail every single time they violate without fail, and eventually people, you know, just say, I'm sick and tired of this. I don't want to go in there. I mean, you've got an expert here. But when people get their probation terminated in court early, because I'll tell them, you can go 2 years without a violation and terminate your probation. And I asked them why, and they said, I got sick and tired of going to jail. Or my wife was going to leave me at that point. Or I finally decided, enough already. I'm sick of this life. And so they change it. So that's where reasonable people can disagree. I get paid the big bucks to be a judge and make those decisions. But the way I kind of gauge myself is, if I gave them too many chances, really, they'd be committing new crimes more often. And the research we have shows that's not the case. 11 years into this, and the original research we had showed people on hope were getting arrested for new crimes half as often as people on regular probation, and they were going to prison half as often. So hope is not perfect. Guys on hope are going to commit new crimes, but if guys on regular probation are going to commit crimes.
Let me ask Dr. Kozak, the key to this, the structure that you just described, is essentially keeping jail as the hammer, right? And then the judge is deciding if he's going to put down the hammer, you know. Do you think that that's an effective way of dealing with someone who is addicted to drugs? Because they do tend to relapse, and isn't it good to have that kind of punishment hanging over their head to make them change?
Well, I think we have to look at it, and there's always got to be a consequence to your actions. So sort of separating out the people who are addicted to drugs versus the people who are addicted to drugs committing violent crimes or committing some sort of crime in society. If you just look purely at the addiction by itself, recognizing that that individual needs to have the opportunity to be able to work with the rehabilitation program over the course of not just a few months, but over the course of maybe a year, if not longer, then if that person who has never committed any sort of violent crime is given multiple chances through rehab, relapses are going to happen. Just because someone relapses who went through rehab doesn't mean that it's a failure. Just because somebody who's on probation winds up committing a crime doesn't mean that probation has failed, whether it be hope probation or regular probation. I think keeping in mind that this is something that's going to recur and accepting that sense that you might have to have them go through several times is what we really have to look at as an effective way to treat them. Certainly if they're violent and they're committing heinous crimes in society, we should really offer rehab in the prison system, in jail, so that they have already been punished in some way for their crime, but in addition are still given that opportunity to address the addiction from the medical standpoint, which is really part of what I think we're missing right now, is an appropriate way, particularly in the islands, to identify those people who need rehab and give them an opportunity to go through that program. Nationwide, we're only reaching about 11 to 12% of all people addicted to drugs by providing them with a rehabilitation opportunity. And in Hawaii, we're right about the same.
Well, Dennis Tamura, you know, you've been through this. The judge keeps calling you an expert. I know you're an expert in yourself. But what happens in prison? We got a caller asking, how common is it to get drugs while in jail? I mean, we often think of jail as a place to get someone away from drugs. When you were addicted, were you just as addicted in jail as you were out of jail?
No. It even puzzles me. Like, when I go into jail, I do everything correctly. I just don't need to sabotage myself, and still I got into trouble. But I'm one of those that just keep my nose clean and try to make the best of the time, where I know how it is going to be, or what do I have to do to get released. So I just focus on doing that so I can get out. And in the beginning, it was all good, but then the goal was to get out and get high.
You know, you described what it was like being in Hope probation. You said it basically eventually broke you. What was it that broke you? You mentioned the pride and so on, but was it getting dragged into jail and back out of jail? Was it?
It was a number of things, and one of them was my daughter wrote me a letter and said that she lives with my elderly mom, and at the time my older sister, and she said, we have 3 chicks in this house, and we need a male here to help us with repairs, to protect us. And it hit me like, boy, and I thought I was a criminal with integrity, that I was a drug dealer with integrity. And I found out that I'm just, and I called myself a name that, you know, starts with a P, but I won't mention it. And that hit me. And going to treatment also, and treatment was afforded by Hope Probation. And eventually I caught on like, wow, if I just change my thinking, then my behavior gonna change.
You know,
and
we
that
did
was
get
a big step.
We got a caller with a very specific question for you, and it was, did religion play a role in you becoming sober?
Yes, God plays a big role in me being sober today. The other treatment did a lot. Hinamalka did the most for me, but I had to choose some kind of support system. And for somebody like me, I need somebody supernatural. And I've seen miracles work in my life that happen, and that's the route I take. So
Well, congratulations.
God is, if not, I wouldn't be sitting here today. If not for His grace, I wouldn't be here. So I stay sober from, not because of what all the knowledge or experience I have, is because how can I give back to somebody that gave me this chance? Most of my friends are dead, and a couple of them still using, and you know, they died from AIDS, from liver cancer, from heart attacks, from overdoses. And I stopped counting after 30 people because I thought I'd get into morbid counting deaths, you know, so I stopped.
Wow, okay.
You know, I think there's some people see you have to choose between treatment or consequences. And Dr. Kozak is exactly right. A lot of people are going to need treatment. One of the interesting things we've discovered about Hope is if people know they're going to go to jail and for a few days, typically for every positive drug test, most people can stop using without going to treatment. And that'll 51% of this randomized control trial study did not use in the first year. But that saves the precious treatment beds for the ones who can't stop or the ones who request it. So the two work together. Alan Johnson, you know, has said treatment works, but it works even better if they're in Hope because they know there's going to be a consequence if they leave.
Let me ask this question, because this comes from a caller also. What's the difference between drug court and Hope? Jake, you were talking, Jake Delaplane from the prosecutor's office, you were talking about drug court. Tell us what drug court is and how is it different from Hope?
So drug court happens before there's a disposition on the case. And so when the case
disposition means
sentenced, found guilty, pled guilty. So either go to trial, be found guilty by a judge or jury, or plead guilty, admit that you did it. Drug court happens before all of that. So there are different tracks in drug court, but on one particular track for the first-time offenders, instead of going through the normal process of the criminal justice system, drug court sort of intervenes early on. And they get into the drug court program, they're supervised by drug court, it's quite intensive, and at the end, if they graduate drug court, if they meet all the requirements of drug court, we'll dismiss the case. So they don't have a conviction on their record.
So are these all
completely clean?
First-time offenders?
Yes.
Or, okay, good.
That's how drug court started. And I give Keith a lot of credit, along with Judge Milks and, you know, and Lieutenant Governor Iona eventually.
I think he was the one that took
He was the
credit
first
for it.
judge.
Okay. Oh, I
But
see.
everybody
Okay.
else got together and said, let's try something new. It started 30 years ago in Miami. But over the years, I think the judiciary has finally wised up and realized, just like the prosecutor's office, they put the most experienced deputies with most support handling the toughest cases. And so we did kind of drug court 2.0 when I was drug court judge, and we've shifted the focus. So drug court is now at the far end of the continuum, dealing with the toughest cases. Because in drug court, you see the judge once a week. You get a counselor, a case manager, you live at clean and sober housing. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of supervision. And drug court, when I started in drug court, there were 127 people. We get up to 197. And Janice Bennett was a drug court coordinator. She and I said, let's do what the prosecutor's office, what the public defenders, what the hospitals do. You put your resources at the toughest cases, you're going to get the best bang for your buck. So we have a, think of the hospital, courthouse as a hospital. Regular probation is the outpatient clinic. Hope is the wards, dealing with some tough cases. Drug court's now the ICU. So if people fail on regular probation, they get put in Hope. If they fail in Hope, it depends on the reason. If they run away repeatedly, they go to prison, because they've shown us they either can't or won't do probation supervision. But if they have tried a program or two and they just can't stop using drugs, that's who we've been putting into drug court, including violent people, including people that have really screwed up. But as long as they're not running away, then the structure of drug court can really help them succeed. So that's been a change, but that's starting to be the trend around the country, shifting the focus of drug court.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you just for a moment, Judge. We're going to remind our viewers that tonight we're talking about what to do with Hawaii's drug offenders. Please call, email, or tweet your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 if you're calling from Oahu, and 800-238-4847 if you're calling from a neighbor island. Dr. Kozak, I'd like to give you an opportunity because we've got a couple of questions. Which program combines rehab and jail time? I think that most of them kind of do, right? And you favor that. I think you answered that question. What does the panel think would be the ideal program approach to reducing the number of addicts and drug offenders? Let me give you a chance to explain how what you're proposing would be different from what we have now when we talk about drug court and Hope.
Well, part of what, if you look at this from the medical perspective, you have to say integrating doctors into prescribing medications that are not the addictive drugs. So we hear about things like methadone. There's a couple of other medications out there that when you think of a true rehabilitation program, there's the structure and the societal pressure to, if you're in drug court, show up once a week, or if you're in the Hope program, you have responsibilities and targets that you must meet to show that you're still participating in the program, but also adding the medical component, which is looking at the fact that the average cost to prescribe medication to help someone get off of drugs, whether it be methadone, whether it be Vivitrol, whether it be Suboxone, a whole bunch of different options, is on average the cost as probably about 3 years ago or so was about $5,000, maybe $5,500 a year, versus looking at someone in prison, and you mentioned $49,000 a year. So if we can try and find a way to integrate some of the medical perspective, allow people not only to go through the Hope program or any type of probation program, but add treatment by a physician with medications that are being monitored, because the biological basis of addiction is such that you take a drug, it activates a receptor in your brain, and you get a benefit from that. Physically, you get a benefit. Now, if you're taking a drug for pain, the benefit is relief of pain. But if you're taking a drug for some other reason, the benefit is some secondary high. You're releasing all of these wonderful neurotransmitters in your brain that make you crave and seek that drug. No matter what sort of behavioral treatment that you do, there are triggers that will set off those reminders of your brain for that wonderful sensation, make you seek the drug again. You mentioned when you left prison, your first goal was to get high again, and that's the idea. Is you go in the same environment, you go into the home that might be dysfunctional, or your friends that might be using, and your first trigger is, get the drugs again, I want to go back on it, I want that pleasure sensation. We need to look at it from treating that issue itself. And medicine for years has known how to do this. But the only way to do it effectively is to combine it with the structure of another program and integrate those together. And that's the aspect that we're not seeing enough of.
Okay, when you say we're not seeing enough of, is it that offenders are not getting treatment, or that the treatment itself is not ideal?
It's probably a combination of both. I think in some cases offenders may not be getting the treatment, or they might show temporary success by following the more behavioral component without adding the medical treatment component with it. we don't have enough rehabilitation beds for all the people that need it. And your analogy to the hospital is excellent, which is we have the ICU version. We only have enough beds for the most difficult cases, but we don't really have the opportunity for the average standard person who's addicted to drugs, who may not have gotten to the point where they're stealing and selling to support their habit, for that person to start getting treatment. We don't have enough doctors in the islands that are able to prescribe these medicines. We also have a huge situation with the DEA coming down very hard on people and physicians who are trying to prescribe medications to get people off of what they're addicted to. So doctors are afraid to prescribe it. And as a result, even though there might be a temporary fix, unless we address the medical component, we're not really going to be able to fully address the addiction, and we won't see the success that we're hoping for.
Okay, Jake Delaplane from the prosecutor's office. You're a prosecutor, right? Your job is to prosecute people. Do you sometimes think that, from what Dr. Kozak is saying, that people have tried treatment before they end up in the criminal justice system and it didn't work? Or do you find that the drug treatment programs that are available are working for offenders?
Oh, I think the drug treatment programs that are available are fantastic. I think that it's just the nature of drug addiction that sometimes that first bout of treatment, it's just not going to work. And they're not going to have a 100% success rate. If they did, that would be fantastic. But I think, probably the whole panel agrees with this, and I think we could see it from some of what Dennis said. There's no one smoking gun solution to any of this, and the best way to approach it is from all angles. And I think from a prosecutor's perspective, a lot of times we're couched in terms of, well, those guys just want to send everybody to jail. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We're out to fight crime. We want to reduce crime. We want to make the community safer. That doesn't always mean putting someone in jail. Sometimes it means putting someone in treatment. Sometimes it means they go to hope probation. I think one of the major things that we could do a lot better with is the availability of drug treatment while people are incarcerated. For those people that have failed over and over and over again, they failed at hope probation, they failed at drug court, they failed at inpatient treatment, they end up incarcerated. We should be treating our jails like inpatient drug treatment centers for these people.
Do we not? Judge,
There's Cashbox, which is a good program. It's a Waiava Correctional Facility, but I think it's only 100 beds, and it's at the very last end of their sentence.
It's when they're almost leaving.
Right, and there's no question we should get more good drug treatment here. And that means growing the good programs, growing Hinamauka, so they have a dedicated funding source that can hire more people. And they're trying to expand, but they have like 48 beds. ATS, Salvation Army ATS has 48 beds. Sand Island has 122. Ho'omaukeola has 16. That's not very many beds. That's why I'm excited about when we can do interventions like HOPE, where we can triage out the ones who can stop, who don't need treatment. That saves those precious treatment beds. And because I only see them when they violate, that's the typical difference between drug court and HOPE. In HOPE, after the initial warning orientation hearing, where I encourage them to succeed, but I tell them what the rules are, I only see people when they violate. So that's why I can supervise 2,000 people. I have about 30 hearings a day, 4 days a week. And I encourage the listeners, they want to come watch this, come down to Circuit Court across in the Felder Building, 8:30 in the morning, Tuesday through Friday. They can see our justice system in action.
Dennis Timur, that reminds me, when did you ever seek treatment before you got in trouble?
Yes, but I was kind of like forced. My girlfriend said, "You're a drug addict. You need to go to Hinamauka." This was in 1987. And I said, okay, and I finally agreed because I was messing up so much, I had to agree. And when I answered the assessment question, I thought, I got this. And I was so surprised when the assessor told me that we should put you in treatment right now. I thought I was answering all the answers correctly. I mean, that's how warped my thinking was.
But was it available to you? Could you have gone in? Did you go in?
Yes, I went in.
And what happened?
I went in, but I had some painkillers with me when I went in. So, I didn't go in because I knew I had a problem. I went in to please somebody else. And sometimes it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
Jake Delaplane, on that point, do you think that treatment is always necessary, or is it sometimes just something that changes in a person because of their exposure to criminal justice or some other factor?
Well, I think anytime you have drug addiction, I think you absolutely need treatment. Like Judge Alm said, some people can stop and they don't need any sort of intensive treatment. They just need to stop the behavior. And some people will have either the willpower or wherever that comes from, they're able to do that. But we know from every study that's out there that drug addiction is a real physical thing. It's not just in someone's mind. It is a physical addiction. And I don't think that we can just say, oh, well, cold turkey is the way to go for everybody, and let's just lock everybody up that has these drugs. That's an approach that we've tried. It hasn't worked. It's failed miserably pretty much everywhere that's been implemented, and so we have to be smarter about our approach.
And the data does show, even if we coerce them into treatment, people do just as well if they're coerced through the system as going in on their hands and knees. Because if they go in there on their own, they can leave with no consequence. If we send them from court, like in Hope, if they leave, they're going to go to jail for a little while. So that keeps them in treatment. That's what Alan Johnson said. It helps people persevere in treatment.
But Doctor, do you think there's too many people in prison for drug crimes? And could we reduce that by doing something?
We talked about statistics earlier, and I think you mentioned there's about 5,000 people that are currently incarcerated in Hawaii or in facilities in the mainland.
And let me just add to that the numbers that we got was about 460 of those inmates were there where a drug crime was their main crime, and some number like 360 were for basically possession or minor level of sale. Just so we have that context.
Sure. So when you look at that data, you say, okay, you're looking at less than 10% of people in the prison system for whom drug is their main offense. And certainly that would suggest that maybe, and if you look at it on a grander scale, our prisons are not full of drug offenders and drug addicts. And that's good, because I think hopefully that means that those people are being offered other options for treatment. But even as Dennis said, it took him several times to recognize that he had consequences, and you were tired of going to jail. You were tired of having that process take place. So it took something else to get you into that system where you said, okay, now I'm ready to do things differently. So you may have some of the people that are currently incarcerated who may be incarcerated for one crime, but in fact they are a drug addict. That's not their primary crime. And part of what happens when you're addicted to drugs is the impulse center of your brain is affected. So you don't have that inhibition, and you may have experienced this when you go, I have to get my drugs, I'm going to have to steal something from someone so that I can sell it and get my drugs. And the part of your brain that would stop you from doing that doesn't seem to function. And so it may not be their primary crime, but it might be what drove them to commit some of the other crimes. So the other 4,400, 600, or however many there are, might still have a drug addiction issue that's not the main reason they're in jail. And I think if we look at what drugs does to someone's brain, and we start looking at it from this medical perspective, and we start treating those changes that occur in the brain to the best of our ability, then we may see that although our jails are not full of drug offenders and fixing the drug problem is not going to eliminate jails, we are still going to be able to take a segment of society for which we've criminalized a behavior that has a medical basis and found a better way to treat them and allow them to become productive members of society like they used to be.
Dennis, let me ask you, when you committed crimes, was it purely to pay for drugs, or were you a criminal for other reasons too?
No, it was to pay for drugs.
Okay, so to go back to judge and a prosecutor, this question from Sam and Kalihi: should Hawaii legalize all drugs? So if this is a medical problem and not a crime problem, why don't we just do that?
You're going to get a lot more drug use. If you legalize methamphetamine, people, especially teenagers, aren't good decision makers. You are going to have more drug use. You're going to have more people getting addicted to it. Some people, try methamphetamine, cocaine, they use it occasionally, they don't get addicted. But a certain percentage are. And so you're going to increase those numbers. So marijuana probably across the country is going to slowly go that way, but I don't think the other drugs are going to get legalized anywhere.
So my guess is you agree with that.
I do. I absolutely agree with that. And I would like to add, too, especially with methamphetamine, it has such a strong effect on the brain, and especially with prolonged use. What we end up seeing is a lot of our violent crimes that come in, I just had one about a month ago where an individual had been using methamphetamine for upwards of 20 years. He's a 50-year-old man, and he became delusional and went downstairs to the apartment below him with a knife and tried to stab his landlord. And the reason that he said that he was going to stab his landlord was because he believed that if he stabbed his landlord, that he would be reunited with his middle school girlfriend from when he was 12 years old, and that they would ride off into the sunset together. And this was all brought on by drug addiction. It was years of drug addiction that led to that. Now he was eventually found incompetent to stand trial and was committed to the state hospital. But if we legalize drugs and it becomes commonplace and we have more users, we're going to have more situations like that. So I just really don't think that that's the answer.
Dr. Haining from the medical school, we've seen these pictures of brains with holes in them, but he says even if people can desist for a year, even those brains can start to come back. And that's why he's very interested in programs like HOPE, because if you can help people reduce their drug use, help them desist from it, their life is only going to get better. So it's a combination. It's everybody working together to do all this stuff. And I think when people, I think the first time they use a drug is probably the best it's ever going to get. And after they keep using it for a while, they use it to feel normal. And so it really isn't, but like, as you say at first, it is pleasurable. That's why people do it. And if they have impulse control, they're younger, they're going to make bad decisions. You're just going to get more of it.
Dr. Kozak, I'm just curious, the same question, do you support decriminalization of more drugs?
You have to look at the drug itself, and when you think of, is there any clinical benefit? So some of the questions that come up with, medical marijuana, should we just target that area, is that there's a clinical benefit for people with certain medical conditions for which that drug may be helpful. So aside from making it legalized for any reason, in medical situations, it definitely makes sense. I can't think of a medical use for crystal amphetamines. I can't think of a medical use for cocaine or heroin that would in any way justify legalizing it. And I really think that the potential harm and abuse and the side effects of, like you mentioned, the poor landlord who might actually be murdered because somebody has overdone and abused a drug for so long, it has caused them to have behavioral effects for which they become a danger to society. We really haven't seen people who smoke too much pot go off and commit a lot of crimes. We don't see that happening as often as if you are addicted to heroin or crystal meth or some other type of a drug. I don't see legalizing it would actually provide any benefit to anyone in society, no medical benefit, but I only see that this could potentially lead to more harm.
Okay, Jake Delaplade, on that point, we were talking earlier, the law does treat marijuana different from other drugs.
It does, absolutely.
And how does that work?
So in order to classify as a felony, you would qualify for incarceration for over 1 year, you have to have a heck of a lot of marijuana on you. And we're talking about major distribution amounts.
How much is that? I mean,
it's, if I brought a bag of it, it would end up being a gallon-sized bag full of marijuana. That would probably be about felony level. And even at that level, you're looking at C felony level, which only carries a term of about 5 years.
And that would almost always be probationable the first time around anyway.
Absolutely, and it is. That's how these cases progress through the system. Typically, when we're seeing marijuana and we charge marijuana and prosecute marijuana, it's always in conjunction with other drugs that, like methamphetamine or cocaine or heroin.
Let me ask Dennis this question. It just occurred to me, if the front end crimes, right, like a bag of marijuana, right, if they actually were more serious about that in the criminal justice system, do you think people like you might have gotten in trouble earlier and then gotten treatment earlier if they were tougher on even the less dangerous crime like marijuana?
No. The way I look at it is that how I felt when I smoked marijuana in the beginning was I found a way to fill a void, to have good feelings, to be happy, because I had some issues. So the way that I realized that I can feel good about myself and feel confident was by smoking weed. And then, so that got me into the realization that, hey, if I want to feel good, I take drugs. So I think drugs are more of And marijuana did lead, because it was okay. I gave myself the green light and I experimented with different drugs. So it's an issue that medically should be addressed from an early age, because I believe my insecurities or the way I looked at the world was, I didn't want to be a part of it.
You know, Dr. Kozak, I'm sorry to interrupt,
No.
Dennis. Dr. Kozak, one of the things that we often hear about in these with drug addicts is there oftentimes there's they call it the dual diagnosis, right? And Dennis is talking about having a void in his life and sort of treating self-medicating himself. I mean, how good is the system at dealing with that issue in the criminal justice system?
Do you mean looking at the mental health aspect in addition to the drug aspect?
Right.
You know, they often go hand in hand. And the problem is that at this point, for somebody who is a young teenager who says, I want to go ahead and I want to smoke pot because I'm filling a void, we need to have better mental health services to reach those teenagers or those young adults, because we're not really reaching them from that perspective. And the psychological changes that are going on as they're going through puberty, et cetera, are causing changes for how they feel emotionally. And it may be leading them to try other drugs or try other sorts of things that are not necessarily beneficial. But once they've already started to have that problem, you can actually instigate mental illness with some of these other drugs. You can actually mimic people having problems with antisocial behavior because you're eliminating that inhibition center of the brain once they start using some of these other drugs. So really, you can't treat one without the other. And most programs of rehabilitation take a look at acknowledging that there's a mental health component. Psychological wellness has to take place in addition to physical wellness. We don't tend to look at those things together in the criminal justice system as well as perhaps we should. But I'll be honest, we don't do it in general society enough either.
Well, Judge, I'm curious about that. I mean, you must come across a lot of these folks.
We actually do, and I think it's one of those areas, because if HOPE makes people more compliant with probation, it works with the mental health population as well. So they're more likely to go see their psychiatrist. And I tell them, you have a chemical imbalance. The medical professionals say you should take certain medications. No offense, if you don't take them, you're going to go to jail. And then they take them, and everything else in their life works better. So the mental health professional really like this. Janice Bennett in drug court got a grant for 30 people, mea kukua, to expand a track for drug court. They ended up putting 70 people into it. The criminal justice system is awash with people with mental health issues, and the combination of two are vicious, and they don't want to take their meds, and so in order to deal with the side effects and the voices, they smoke meth in order to deal with that, and that causes even more problems. So it really is a great way to try to focus and get people to be more medication compliant. They can be more successful on probation.
A new question, I'm going to deal with a number of questions from our viewers. And I think this is in the context of what else could we be doing, you know, and this is a question of how do drugs get onto Oahu? Can they be intercepted before they get here? Jake Delaplane, what are we seeing now in terms of the flow of drugs? And could we be doing more to keep them out?
Well, we can always be doing more, and you know, the police do a great job here. Both the state and federal authorities do a lot of operations to try to curtail that. But when you're talking about the drugs coming in through the U.S. mail system, drugs coming in through private carriers like UPS and FedEx, and then just if you go down to the harbor and look at how many containers are out there, you know, there's a lot of different ways that drugs come into the state. You know, I just read an article about I think it was something like 6 pounds of meth coming in a toaster oven that was shipped here from the mainland. So there are a lot of ways. You know, when I first came here, I was originally a prosecutor in Alabama years ago. And when I first came to Hawaii, I thought, man, you know, I'm coming to an island. We should be able to stamp out the drug problem, right? It's not like somebody can just drive over the state line and bring a whole bunch of drugs in here. But you know, it's a rude awakening when you realize all of the different ways that drugs can come into the state. And it's not something that we're ever going to be able to completely stamp out. I think we have a better shot at creating a system where there is enough treatment in place, where we start to take stabs at the addiction problem so that there's not as big of a market for the drugs for people to buy. And maybe that's how we start to reduce things. I don't think it's necessarily solely from the enforcement side.
Okay, Dennis, let me ask this question. David of the Big Island asks, would the panel discuss the importance of unemployment in an addict's ability to get off drugs? What was your relationship with the working world when you were addicted, and how much, would having a job, do you think, made a difference?
In the beginning, I needed that paycheck so I could binge on the weekend. But eventually that got out of hand and I lost my job. And then when I ended up on the street selling drugs, my prey and the thing I was looking for is a businessman or even an attorney that would eventually, maybe every 3 months, they'd pop up and they'll be spending like $400 a day, And
so well-employed people were addicted.
And
to
eventually in
their
around
customers.
3 to 6 months, they lose their business. So
Let me ask this, Judge. Are there jobs for the people who come through your program?
Absolutely.
How big an issue is that?
We made a real push to have the drug court folks get a job. Because I said, I have to work, you guys should have to work. And so every Monday I'd ask them, do you have a job? Where are you looking? Janice Bennett then would have them come in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning because they weren't doing anything else. Where's your resume? Let's practice interviewing. Where are you going to look today? As soon as they got a job, we'd all clap and I'd give them a payday candy bar. And then they wouldn't have to show up for that employment assistance group. And almost everybody got a job. Our employers will give people chances. We're talking washing dishes, McDonald's, parking facilities. But once you have a job, it's easier to get another job. So it takes work, it takes effort, but the drug court people were great. And then when one person would get a job in a place, there's a gal named Janitro got a job in a parking place. Once a second person got a job in the same place, I would really praise the first one because they made it safe to hire the second one. So, and eventually 15 people ended up working there.
Okay, we've actually run out of time. I'm glad to finish up on a message of hopefulness. Next week, we're going to be talking about dengue fever. Since September, 145 cases have been diagnosed on Hawai'i Island. The state is spraying for mosquitoes that carry the virus and warning residents and visitors alike to take precautions to avoid an illness so painful it's often called break-bone fever. But critics say that more aggressive measures are needed. On the next Insights, what do we need to know about dengue fever in Hawaii? Thanks to our panel, and that's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho.